What if I told you there is a sport out there that combines hard tackles with no protection, with electric runs the length of a field, and high-flying catches as men and women launch themselves into the sky? Sounds too good to be true, right? Well, worry no more. That sport does exist, and it's called Australian Rules Football, or footy for short. A quick note here, you might have actually heard the sport referred to as AFL. While this is okay as a shorthand, the AFL is actually the top league that plays footy, as opposed to being the actual name of the sport. Anyways, whilst I was rediscovering my love for the sport after drifting away from it for my schooling years, I was a bit surprised to find out there was no real comprehensive video on the history of the game I love. So who better than I, a man with no experience in video, audio, or writing, as I'm sure you can already tell, to create that video, or more accurately, videos. So, if you're like me, a footy fan wanting to know more about the game, or simply wondering what the hell Robbie Williams has been talking about on his Instagram for the last week, I will try to do my best to enlighten you on this great game. Given the relatively youthful nature of Australia, if, like the British, you ignore the people who have lived here for pretty much the entire time that people have been around, the origins of Australian rules football are thankfully pretty well known. On July 10th, 1858, a letter penned by a named Tom Wills was published, calling for a football, yes that's foot-ball, club with a code of laws to be formed to help keep cricketers fit during winter. Wills, the Victorian, that being the state in Australia, cricket team captain, played a form of rugby whilst at the appropriately named rugby school in his youth in England, with it being common at the time for English schools to simply write their own rules of a football-like sport. Football in the broader sense, that is. After a few kickabouts involving Wills and many other Victorian cricketers, a match was played between Scotch College and Melbourne Grammar, using experimental rules and an unbelievable 40 people-a-side teams. Perhaps unsurprisingly, this match took multiple days to finish, and ended in a 1-goal each draw, scoring probably being difficult due to the frankly insane number of people on the field at once. Despite this, clearly some liked the game, because on the 14th of May 1859, the Melbourne Football Club was established, making it the 10th oldest club of any football-related clubs in the world, if Wikipedia is to be believed. Whilst I will mention the formation dates of a few clubs, each of the founding members of what will become the AFL will be mentioned in the next video, going through the early years of the VFL. After the formation of the Melbourne Football Club, Wills and other cricketers met and drafted the 10 rules of the Melbourne Football Club. While some rules are procedural in nature, there are some interesting rules, with the notable one being the lack of an offside rule, which sets Aussie rules apart. There was also no centre bounce, or ball up as known today, with the loser of a coin toss starting with the ball. There are only 2 posts at each end, with a kick cleanly between these posts being required for a goal. After each goal, the side who had just been scored against would simply bring the ball 18 metres back from the goal and have a kick in. Anyone who caught the ball from a kick on the full would have completed a mark, with the same player then being allowed to take a kick with no interference from an opponent, a free kick if you'd like. Tripping and pushing were both allowed if a player was rapidly moving or had the ball. However, hacking, shin kicking, was strictly banned. After all, this is a game designed not to injure people. Everyone knows you can't get injured from a trip. You're not allowed to pick the ball off the ground, only being allowed to receive it from a mark, or if the ball happens to hop or bounce. The ball also could not be thrown. Finally, the throw-in rule was also established, with the ball being thrown in if it goes out of bounds. Whilst these were a few of the explicit rules established, there were a few implicit rules around as well. That being that the captains of each team would act as umpires. Teams would consist of 20 players. The winner of the game would be the first team to score a whole 2 goals. It's important to note that these were the Melbourne rules, meaning that clubs formed soon after Melbourne, including Geelong and Melbourne University, known simply as University, simply played with their own variations of the rules. This, unsurprisingly, caused confusions and led to multiple multi-club meetings to help refine some of the rules. In 1860, clubs including St Kilda, Richmond, Melbourne, Collingwood, University and South Yarra met to redraft the Melbourne rules. Whilst South Yarra tried to pass a push in the back rule, this was denied. However, some rule changes were implemented. Goals could now be scored by the ball simply being forced between the posts in scrimmage. Running with the ball was explicitly banned, although it was often leniently enforced, the small run to allow for a clean kick often being allowed. Finally, an extra rule was added, allowing for free kicks to be given when a team was found to deliberately infringe on any other established rules. Whilst rule changes would unfortunately not end there, let's take a break and check in with the rest of Australia. Organised football was seen outside of Victoria first in South Australia with the formation of the Adelaide Football Club. No, not that Adelaide Football Club. By 1877, the South Australian Football Association, the first governing body of the sport, was formed. Football was introduced into Queensland and New South Wales as early as 1866, although rugby would continue to be popular due to British migration. Depressingly, it took until 1881 for footy to make it to my home state, Western Australia, with a club confusingly called the Unions being formed, with the West Australian Football League, or WAFL, being formed in 1885. However, before we get to some leagues, we have more rule changes to note. In 1866, another committee was formed to redraft the rules, with the notable inclusion of a member of the Carlton Football Club. These rules are the best semblance of modern football, although changes would continue over the next 160 odd years. In these rules, point posts were established, although I don't think the scoring of points or behinds was actually known or enforced. Tripping was banned, with holding now specifically only allowed when a player has the ball. Running was also allowed, although a bounce was required every 9 or 18 metres. Why such a big gap in when a bounce was required, I don't really know. An umpire was now also required to be established prior to the game. To not bog this video down in further rules, let's cover all rule changes prior to 1897 now. In 1869, a time limit of 100 minutes per game was introduced. In 1872, the ball-up was introduced, stopping lengthy, pointless scrimmages. At some point prior to 1884, goal umpires were introduced, and in 1884, they began to wave white flags to communicate with the umpire at the opposite end of the ground. This rule was first seen in Tasmania, but was introduced in Victoria in 1887. Finally, in 1891, a centre bounce at the start of quarters and after every goal was established, players taking set positions at the start of play. However, outside of the rules, football was beginning to be organised, with 1861 seeing the first organised competition, the Challenge Cup. However, the first competition anyone actually cared about would be in 1877, with the formation of, drumroll everyone, the South Australian Football Association, later renamed to the South Australian Football League and then the South Australian National Football League, or SANFL. However, despite the SANFL getting in first, the seed of a national competition began a month later, in May of 1877, with the Victorian Football Association being established, or VFA. Some important foundation clubs included Melbourne, Geelong, St Kilda, Carlton and Hotham, later known as North Melbourne. There were both senior and junior members of the VFA, although there was no real system of promotion or relegation, nor was there a formal fixture until 1888. At this point, premiership points were allocated to wins, premiership points being a unit of measurement for a win, a draw or a loss. The premiership was introduced, awarded to the highest finishing league team. Yes, there were no finals at this point. After this, the ever-changing teams settled, with some important clubs having joined over the decade or so since the VFA launched. Essendon, Fitzroy, Footscray, Richmond and South Melbourne had all joined at this point. However, all was not rosy in the newly organised VFA, with the 1890s being defined by a power struggle between stronger and weaker clubs, with the stronger striving for greater control. In 1896, the issues between clubs in the league would grow too much. A suggestion to pool gate profits made from ticket sales and then distribute them evenly to all clubs was not well received by the richer clubs. As such, those richer clubs, Collingwood, Essendon, Fitzroy, Geelong, Melbourne and South Melbourne, officially seceded from the VFA and formed the Victorian Football League, or VFL, to play its first season in 1897. Seeking access to the geographically well-positioned Junction Oval, St Kilda was also invited to join the league, along with Carlton, who despite a decade of weak results, had a proud and strong history. However, the story of those clubs and the early VFL seasons are a tale for another day. Just want to jump in at the end of this video, which was unfortunately mostly dominated by rules, and just give a quick shout out to anyone who has seen this video at any point in time. I've clearly got no experience doing something like this, but it's always something I've wanted to do. And if you like this video in any way, just support it in any way you can, whether that's a like, a subscribe, or even a share. Next time we'll be covering the 10 formation clubs, what they're about, a brief bit of their history and their colours, before going on to the 10 seasons of the VFL from 1897 to 1907. I'll see you then.